Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Good, Bad, and Ugly of Business. I'm your host, Katherine Becker. On this podcast, we interview people from all different walks of life, different industries, different professions, because we want to learn what they've learned. Because while a smart person learns from their mistakes, a genius learns from the mistakes of others. And we want to learn what these successful people have learned so that we can either completely avoid the mistakes they have or we can fail faster. My guest today, her name is Lauren Cockerell, and she is the president of Kwedar Co, which is a credible PR and marketing agency out of Fort Worth. We've got some really interesting things that we're going to talk about along the PR and marketing space, but also along the life space. So Lauren, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Katherine. It's great to be here.
It is so great to be here. I am so glad to meet another person living in the great state of Texas. Not that there's anything wrong with the other states, but it's always nice to have like a neighbor.
Yes, we can use y'all freely.
Exactly. Unleash the y'all. For my international listeners, Google it. So Lauren, please tell us a little bit more about Kwedar Co and how you started that agency.
Sure. Well, we are a small but mighty PR and marketing firm, like you said, based in Fort Worth. And we really love to work with founders and CEOs of small businesses, as well as high-level integrators of some larger companies. And we really help them figure out what their vision is and then help them reach it and clarify it and cast that vision for their internal and external audiences. And that includes working with the media. It includes social media and marketing, emails, websites, the whole strategic communications umbrella. And so we love it. I have a fantastic team. I've got a couple of folks who are with me full-time, W-2 folks, as well as some dedicated contractors. And it's just, I'm very grateful to have such a beautiful team and wonderful clients. And then I started it back in 2017 when I was 8 months pregnant with our second kiddo, and I was laid off from my in-house job. And it was a scary time. Owning my own firm was something I always wanted to do, but I had this magical age of 40 in mind of like, that's when I'm going to know everything. And so that spoiler alert, when I turned 40, that didn't happen, but, but I thought, that's when I can do this. But then at 37 or so, when this happened, I didn't really feel comfortable interviewing, hugely pregnant. I was also pretty confused and beaten down a little bit at that point in my career. And so
Well, I mean, it's an emotional thing to get laid off.
yes,
It's
and
an
you're extra
thing
emotional.
to be pregnant.
Yeah.
You combine the two. I mean,
Yes.
for the ladies that have had children, like for me, when I had my two kids, I felt like, months 4 to 7 were great, right? Like I had
Yeah.
energy back, but
Yeah.
man, months 8 and 9 are hard.
Yep. Lots of feels.
So much feels, but like the emotional feels and then the physical discomfort, like it's not great. So yeah, understood. Please continue.
Yeah. Well, then you sprinkle on some career trauma and, you're not quite sure which way is up there. However, I was serendipitously, I just hired a professional coach the morning that they laid me off. They laid me off in the afternoon. That morning I had hired someone because I knew I couldn't stay there anymore. Eventually I was going to have to make a decision, and I didn't know which path I was going to take, but I knew I needed some guidance, someone to kind of help build me back up a little bit. And so we were going to explore two paths: starting my own company, or building a new resume and going out and finding something else. And at that moment, I was like, well, I guess we'll start my own company from the get-go here. We'll see what happens. But truly, it ended up being exactly where I needed to be. Folks came out of the woodwork a little bit, just like, oh, you're back in action. Let's do this. Because I'd worked for a PR firm for 10 years before that. And so I had
established your.
Yeah, exactly. Folks knew my name. They knew my main name, Kwedar. And so actually my husband said, why don't you call it Kwedar PR? That was the original name. It was Kwedar PR. It had a nice bounce to it. And then, folks who had worked with me for 10 years knew that name. And so that was what was cast out in the universe. Actually rebranded last year to Kwedar Co because we do more than PR, and it is more than just the Lauren show now. So we're now Kwedar Co.
I love that.
Yeah. So that's,
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I just want to take a minute to talk more about like starting your own company, right?
mhm.
Is I've likened it to birth
Yeah.
as well, because
Mhm.
it's kind of fun in the beginning when you're like, oh my gosh, are we doing this? Like, is it gonna happen? And usually there's another person involved where
Mhm.
you're excited, and then you kind of have to do the work of getting it all set up, and
Yeah.
then the anticipation of, am I gonna have clients? So you had twins kind of.
Yes. Yeah, I definitely say that, so I had my son that December, and starting my company, I really liken it to a rebirth
Mm.
where I really came back to myself and I was back doing the things that I feel like are my innate special skills and talents that I was born with and that I was put on this earth to do. And so it was like a coming home. It was like a rebirth, and it was sort of a crawl, walk, run process. I definitely started slowly. I had this baby, literal baby, and this business baby. So trying to figure out what was going to work for me, and slowly taking on clients and figuring out the services I really wanted to offer. Of course, that first year was more like, oh, you need something? I'll figure that out, sure. And then going from
That's
there.
kind of what you do at the beginning, right? You're wearing
Yep.
all the hats, you're saying yes to everything,
Yep.
until you kind of narrow that down, because it's not so easy. Even if you feel like you're clear, until you start the doing
Yep.
of the thing, that's really where the clarity comes from, I think.
100%. Yeah, I got a lot of clarity that first year.
Because it's a cycle of the chaos, and then out of the chaos comes the clarity. And then once you're clear, you're ready to take another step, and then you get more chaos. And then
Yep.
you kind of fumble your way through that until you find the next level of clarity. So
Yeah.
it's definitely an adventure.
It's always a learning. And I think being open to that learning makes it a lot less painful. Just like, okay, I've learned a lesson today. I'm not going to do that again. We joke in one of the communities I'm a part of. It's you're paying tuition to the University of not going to do that again.
Oh, I'm going to start incorporating that. I love that. That's really, really good. But you and I were talking before we actually started recording, and I really loved kind of your mindset piece of understanding that it was a good thing actually to be laid off.
hmm hmm
How long did it take you to come to that kind of realization?
Fortunately, not too long. I was working with that coach, and I think probably the second or third session, she noticed that I was still pretty broken up and angry about what had happened. And she said, okay, before we can move forward, we really need to process this a little bit. It was a bit like therapy. And she said, you're very clear on the bad things that happen. Let's map out some of the good things that happened. And so that was helpful. And then my husband was a huge, anytime I might have mentioned it with sort of a wry, like, he'd
Yeah.
say, that is the best thing that has ever happened to you. I mean, that was his drumbeat the whole time. And I was like, you're right. Cause I was scared. I was not feeling myself. I didn't really feel confident anymore due to some of the toxicity at the business. And so really being able to realize that I probably wasn't going to leave on my own 2 feet, that while it was perhaps kind of unkind to lay off a woman who's 8 months pregnant, they did do me a kindness in removing me from a situation where I felt a little trapped.
Oh, that's such a good way to think of it. And, I have stopped working with clients who want to stay in that negative
hmm
loop of,
hmm
and I love saying, you're really clear on the bad. Can
Yeah.
you name me some good?
Yeah. Yeah. And that really, it lifted up my head because I was just, oh, I can't believe they did that to me. And it was, okay, well, it doesn't have to be a long list, but let's list out some of the good things that happened. And so, I got a couple of things down. I was like, okay, all right, I can let this go. And honestly, for you and your listeners, I didn't really start speaking publicly that it was a layoff until this past year. I was really ashamed of it. I
Mhm.
felt that it was, my fault. I felt that I couldn't talk about it, but really, I mean, it happens to a lot of us. If not
Yeah.
everybody, everybody gets fired or laid off or something. And so being able to be more open about it has been healing as well. I feel like I can truly own my story now. And it is, it is very much a clear blessing that I was able to remove myself from that situation or get removed and start this new path that I am meant to be on.
Well, and isn't that the way though? Like, you'd even mentioned feeling stuck,
Mhm.
feeling like, oh, I need to wait till I'm 40 to
Yeah.
do this. And, sometimes life is like, gives us bigger nudges.
Yep. Yep. I call it being crowbarred out of a situation.
Hey, and if that's what it takes, sometimes, that's what it takes. And I love
Yeah.
the saying, like, this didn't happen to me, it happened for me.
Absolutely.
And can
Absolutely.
really, really help with that. Well, I love that, all these interviews are always different. And sometimes, we're 2/3 of the way in before we get to, the ugly, right? It is the
Yeah.
bad and ugly of business. But I love that we kind of started there. So let's go back with the good
Yeah.
and kind of finish off the good. And I have a question that is something that I've been curious about. And I've heard other coaches talk about this, and it's in the name, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
I've heard coaches say like, hey, you named, let's just say it's PR, and you
Mhm.
named it Red Planet,
Yeah.
right? Or
Yeah.
something
Mhm.
completely like not related to what it is, or things that are difficult to spell. And I know it's something that I've personally struggled with. My first name is Katrin. No
Mhm.
one knows how to say my name, let alone spell it. And so I personally don't like to make people feel uncomfortable. So even though I
Mhm.
love my name now, I didn't
Mhm.
for a very long time, because when you're a kid, the last thing I wanted to do was be unique and stand out. But now I can embrace that part of me and love it. But I also don't like to make people feel uncomfortable. So I
Mm,
have shortened my name to Kat, in many
interesting.
situations, because that makes the other person feel more comfortable, even though it's not my personal preference. So especially for a PR agency, Kwedar isn't a common surname.
No.
Um, so
Not
I'd
in the
love,
US at least.
yeah. So I'd love to know kind of I mean, you tell sort of a little bit of, it's your maiden name, but
Mhm.
did you think about that piece of it, going in?
That is such a great perspective, because I love to make people comfortable. I feel like that's as sort of a servant leader type of mindset. I'm usually putting other people first, but I really love my maiden name. And it was really important to me to carry that forward and have it live beyond, because when I got married, I changed my name, but so it's now Cockerell, and I love that too. But but I didn't get married till I was 30. So I met my husband when I was 30. I didn't get married till I was 32. So actually I worked from 22 to 32 as Lauren Kwedar, and I established a reputation in our local market as someone people could trust and rely on and to do good work. And I really wanted to honor that chapter of my life and to know that, and I wanted that name to be synonymous with those positive feelings. And so there are certainly lots of rules of thought around, if you're going to sell one day, then you're selling your name or whatever. And I
Yeah,
think that's a consideration, certainly. But when I was starting, there was no other name for me. I mean, I'd never even tried to think about, oh, does it need to be, Red Planet PR. It was gonna be me. And it was, at that time, to be honest, I didn't think I was gonna ever hire anybody. My head was certainly spinning, but
yeah.
even still, to know that I was gonna be a part of the process and people could rely on anything that they bought from me, and I was willing to put my name on the figurative door with the business name.
Mm. And that makes a lot of sense in that perspective. And obviously it's worked out. People figured out. And I know this is going to sound silly, but the moment that kind of clarified it for me of that, like, no, it's okay to go by Katrin,
Mhm.
was thinking of Oprah.
Sure, yeah.
Like, did Oprah ever try to shorten her name?
Mhm. No.
I don't know if it could be Opie. So I think that, it's so easy for us to get in our own heads,
Mhm.
and create
Yeah,
situations and fears and
and
anxieties.
there's plenty of people who have difficult to pronounce names. And so, actually it makes me extremely sensitive. I always make sure I know how to pronounce other people's names. And so, I don't think I need to reduce myself to another level. We can all just rise together and make sure that we're pronouncing each other's names correctly.
Yes. Yes. And that's part of where I notice people's uncomfortability is because they want to pronounce it correctly.
Right.
And so like in school growing up, I always knew that when the teacher, like the first day of school, like
Mhm.
stopped, because everyone's like Jennifer, Sarah, Thomas, right?
Lauren.
Like Lauren, exactly. And then they'd be like, Wilson, which was my maiden name.
Oh. Oh.
That was an awkward thing, but isn't it strange? I mean, like how growing up, affects all
Yeah.
those things, having those situations is part of why I would act the way I do, but
Mhm.
we
Mhm.
grow up and we evolve.
Yep.
Okay. So another question I have. This is
Mhm.
part of the best part of having this podcast is I just get to ask everyone all my questions without it being like super weird. Cause I can just be like, all right, I'm curious about this, this, and this, and this.
Yeah, lay it on me.
Um, so there are a bazillion, million, bazillion different social media platforms.
Yep.
And then there's the websites and, all the different places. And so I would love to know from your perspective, strategy wise, and if this is totally client dependent, that's interesting to discuss too.
Mhm.
But do you recommend for people to have like the same content in all the platforms so there's consistency? Or do you use the different platforms? Because each platform kind of has its own different
Sure.
vibe to it,
Mhm. Mhm.
to highlight different aspects of the client.
Mhm. It's a good question. So, boy, it is an interesting time to be alive as a marketer and PR person. When I got started literally 20 years ago this month, there was not Facebook.
Isn't that wild
So,
to think about?
yeah, we used to send press releases via fax. Before we left the office for the night, we'd hit the button on the fax machine and leave. Unfortunately, sometimes it rang people's home phones in the middle of the night. So glad we don't do that anymore. So in some ways, it's more complex than it used to be, but in other ways, it's kind of more simple because you get to figure out where your little fishies are, and then you can go fish in their pond. So I just want to say that we try to be as efficient as possible without breaking any unwritten rules for the audience. So we definitely think about what type of client it is. We've got some folks who are, more B2B, and so LinkedIn is their platform to shine. I mean, their traction on LinkedIn blows the others out of the water. However, we don't want to ignore some of the others just because they might not be doing business there. There's still room for support and awareness, and just I like to say, um, you want to build up your local headquarters foundation and use that as your launch pad, whether you're staying locally or you're moving beyond. But having your friends and influencers being aware of what's going on with you is just as useful sometimes as having your prospective clients know what's going on, because they're gonna be aware of what's going on. They can refer you, see things like that. So even for my B2B folks, we're still posting on Instagram, we're still posting on Facebook, we're making sure that Google My Business is populated so that people can see these corporate updates. So we vary a little bit. Obviously a reel is different on a
Right.
different platform. So we make sure that the medium strikes the right balance with the platform we're using, but we also want to make sure that, hey, if it works here, can it be expanded upon and become a blog? Is there something that we can make into a really powerful email series? So we do try to create once and publish multiple times, just to make sure that we're amplifying our messages in a way that we can get the most bang for our buck. But yeah, I think there's no reason that I can see that you wouldn't want to touch all the platforms where you do have a presence. unless it's just doesn't make sense. But I think you have to make that judgment call in the moment. But yeah, no, we try to populate as many platforms as possible, and then, adjust the actual media based on the platform.
Okay, so you would be putting like maybe changing the copy, but using the same graphic.
Sure. Or vice versa. Yeah. So if it's, like, well, for instance, the other day we did a huge PR campaign for one of our clients. And so when it came time to share on Instagram, we really distilled it down, and we made it, a cool a cool image, a product image. We talked a bit about the announcement, and then the second slide in the carousel had to do with the media coverage that we'd already gotten. So it was like, oh, look at these, cool outlets that are covering our news. So it was different from the PR push that we put out to email and on the newswire, but we're still, kind of rallying the troops on the social media platforms with something a little bit different that's more germane to that audience.
Well, I also love how you mentioned about, amplifying the message. And I think it's really a mindset thing that a lot of smaller businesses and solopreneurs get hung up in of, oh my gosh, I'm just like seeing these ads all the time. Like I'm so sick of myself, right? But to remember that, because of the algorithms and how those work, like just because you've seen your own stuff a bunch doesn't mean that your audience has.
Yes. I tell clients all the time, just about the time you are sick to death of it is right about when people are starting to notice it. So let it ride.
Oh, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. And just something for everyone to remember as they go through it, because it is this weird balance that you have to strike. And something I've heard you mention several times is your local community presence. And of course, we're living in a completely digital age.
Right.
And there's so many people that even if they have a product or a service that can be offered, digitally or virtually, what's the balance there in staying in your community? Because that's the other thing. People think like, oh, I've got to reach all these people, but like, how many people do you actually need to like make a profit in your business, right? Do you need 100 people? Do you need 1,000,000 people, right? So, right. So it's something to think about. So kind of what are your thoughts on that, and kind of casting a wide net versus being more geographically specific?
Sure. I would call it starting with a targeted approach. I think you have so many hours in a day, you only have so many dollars in the bank account. So when you are getting started, I really love to target that local audience, through PR and marketing. Go ahead and get I'm going to call it low hanging fruit, but I don't mean that in a pejorative way. I just mean, the audience that's most primed to, okay, oh, this is someone in my headquarters city that just generally feels there's like a natural connection to, like, okay, I'd rather work with, usually people want to work with a small business that's near them versus a global whatever, someplace else. But when we talk about, especially in the PR space, excuse me, your local magazines, your local podcasts, your local TV stations, getting your reps in with a potentially friendlier audience is really helpful. So that as your message grows and as your audience grows, you're more prepared for some of those higher stakes conversations. And then also just being able to say like, yeah, like put it on your website as seen in, and you have these media opportunities that, yes, they may be your local media in your backyard, but still that's a third party endorsement for you and your brand. And so once you get those reps in, then you can start to cast a wider net. You've learned your lessons there. And now it's okay. So if Vogue magazine is your ultimate target audience, you're like, oh my gosh, my life will be made if I can be in Vogue. Starting with your local lifestyle magazine is a great practice round, and having that as proving ground for your product or service. And then also, thinking about your niche audience too. Last year, one of my clients got into a magazine that is very important in their niche, and so they were calling it the Vogue or Sports Illustrated of their niche. It was something that you and I do not get in the mail I can guarantee you, but for them was so critical and meant so much to them. And so I'm sure there's something like that for a lot of your listeners, like, whether, no matter what space you're in, there's probably a niche publication that's at the upper echelon of pubs that would be meaningful to you. And so kind of thinking about that, you don't necessarily need to be in a mass media outlet to make the impact that you're looking for. In fact, you'd probably be better served if you set your sights on something that was really specific to your industry.
Oh, and I think I love that so much about the getting your reps in.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a really good reminder of being able to really practice.
Yeah.
It's one thing when we say it in our head, but then to actually open our mouth and have the words come out in a coherent manner that the other person can understand
Yeah.
it's a huge thing. And then I love what you mentioned about the niche thing. As I'm doing more speaking gigs, there are so many conferences out there that are so niche and so specific that you don't even know they exist
Right.
until you start looking for them and seeing
Right.
them out there.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I'd rather talk to 10 people who are ideal clients than a million and only, one of them is an ideal client.
Exactly.
And then, back to kind of getting your reps in, I would rather a client have their first TV appearance be on their local NBC affiliate morning show than the Today Show. I mean,
Yeah.
there's just you don't want the Today Show to be your first time on TV.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the first time I was on TV, I was so nervous, and now it's like, oh, cool.
Yeah, exactly.
You just show up and you just go, and it's super fun. This
Right.
has been such a great conversation. It's gone by so fast. I really enjoyed getting to speak with you and hear all of your wisdom and your experience. It's been amazing. Is there anything else that you haven't talked about that you would like to before we wrap up?
No, I guess I'll just end with whatever happens in your life or in your business or both, because business is very personal. I have learned to meet each challenge with telling myself, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me. I don't know how yet, but it's going to work out. I've had to say that to myself already multiple times this year, and it has. It is, it might be challenging, and I allow myself that time and space to feel the feelings, the grief, or the whatever it's going to be. But then really looking for how it's going to work out for me in the end has been just a truly transformative mindset.
That is such a great way to end. So now everyone wants to know how to work with you. So please tell the people how they can hire you.
Absolutely. So if you want to come say hi, we are everywhere at Kwedar Co. So that's KWED as in David, ARCO. And that's .com if you're on the website, or across all of our social channels, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, the whole shebang. So I hope you come say hi.
Absolutely. And I will have all of those links in the show notes. But Lauren, thank you so much. This has been
Thank you,
such a
Katrin.
pleasure.
Absolutely. For me too. Thank you.
And to the listeners, thank you so much for being here. If you enjoyed this, please make sure to like and subscribe and share with your audience. For those subscribers, I appreciate you. It means the world to me. I'm so grateful for all of you so that I can continue to bring amazing guests like this. And if there's someone you're curious about, if it's a profession, a person, an industry, please reach out, and I would love to have them as a guest on a future episode. Until next time, everyone, have a great day.